Hey-o, it's Uncle Gomer with a climate debunking video. I call it Debunk the Debunkers with Uncle Gomer.
Debunk the Debunkers!
Now it seems that this young whippersnapper by the name of Rosh Salgado Darcy over at the YouTube channel All About Climate has gone after one of my longtime heroes, Dr. William Happer. Now Rosh attempts to debunk Dr. Happer's claim that the Earth's atmosphere has already reached a saturation point when it comes to CO2 concentration, and adding more CO2 to the atmosphere won't make the planet any warmer. Rosh takes cheap shots at Dr. Happer just because the good doctor has never published any peer-reviewed climate research, and because the theory of CO2 saturation was apparently debunked way back in the 1940s. But that don't matter none. I like what Dr. Happer has to say, so I'm going to believe it, and you should too. In fact, Dr. Happer even says that the Earth don't have enough CO2 in the atmosphere. We're in a CO2 famine, he says, and we should get some more CO2 up in there. So, just to make sure, I looked it up on the interweb, and this is what I found. Apparently, trees and plants also have a CO2 saturation point, so adding extra CO2 to the atmosphere won't necessarily make plants grow much better unless they also get more moisture and more soil nutrients. Samuel Myers, principal research scientist in environmental health at Harvard University, says, and I quote, "We know unequivocally that when you grow food at elevated CO2 levels in fields, it becomes less nutritious." He says food crops lose significant amounts of iron and zinc, and grains will also lose protein. In addition, two University of Washington scientists, Marlies Kovanok and Abigail Swan, published a paper in 2018 where they found that trees thicken their leaves in response to elevated levels of CO2. And they discovered that plants with thicker leaves may exacerbate the effects of climate change because they would be less efficient in sequestering atmospheric carbon, a fact that climate change models had not previously taken into account. On top of that, apparently, scientific studies have found that trees and plants don't grow very well when they're on fire. Drying up in a drought, drowning in a flood, getting torn up in a hurricane, or any of those things that come along more often and more severely as a result of global warming. But all that don't matter none. All that proves is that the botanists and the forestry guys are all in on the climate conspiracy too. So don't you worry about that. I'm still going to debunk Rosh Salgado Darcy's video. Just hold on, I'll get to it. Now, Dr. Happer often points out, as he should, that the Earth has had much higher CO2 levels in the past, and that the trees and plants loved it. The world was apparently a lush green paradise. So, just to make sure, I looked it up on the interweb, and this is what I found. According to the Royal Society, whoever the heck they are, at 50 million years ago, CO2 may have reached 1,000 parts per million, and global average temperature was probably about 10 degrees Celsius warmer than today. Under those conditions, Earth had little ice, and sea level was at least 60 meters higher than current levels. That sounds wonderful to me, don't it to you? It don't matter none that humans weren't around back then, or that every coastal city we have in the world today would be underwater. It would be a time for the people to get back to the land, learn how to swim, and enjoy the tropical weather on whatever land remained habitable and capable of growing crops. So now, let's get back to debunking Rosh Salgado Darcy's video. Now, Dr. Happer eloquently and scientifically explains that CO2 in the atmosphere is like red paint on a barn. You can paint the barn with one coat and it'll be all right. But if you paint another coat on it, it'll be even redder. But after a while, more red paint won't make that barn any redder. Beautiful. Genius. But then Rosh Salgado Darcy comes along and says, well, that might be true to a degree for the CO2 at the surface of the planet, but as we go higher up in the atmosphere, atmospheric pressure and CO2 levels are much lower. So there's still plenty of room to add CO2 up there. Heat up the planet in those higher altitudes, making it even harder for long-wave radiation to escape from the planet's surface. In other words, as it gets warmer up there, it gets warmer down here. Ridiculous. If any of that were true, we would keep our homes warm by doing something crazy like insulating our attics. Nonsense. But here's where Rosh Salgado Darcy's attempt at debunking Dr. Happer really falls apart. Rosh shamelessly uses Dr. Happer's analogy of the painted red barn against him by saying that the barns on the surface of the planet may already have plenty of red paint on them, but the barns high up in the atmosphere have barely been touched by the paintbrush. Well, here's where I debunk you, Rosh Salgado Darcy. Your whole theory falls apart as soon as we remember that you can't have a barn way up in the sky. It'll just fall down. That's why we don't have barns up in the sky. And I'm sure that's why Dr. Happer never even needed to consider that. So there. Boom. Mic drop. What? Anyways, that's it for this episode of Debunking the Debunkers. Rosh Salgado Darcy is wrong, and I'm never wrong, so I'll leave a link to Rosh's full video right up here, just so you can see it for yourself and see how wrong he is. I'm Uncle Gomer, reminding you not to worry about a thing. Everything's gonna be just fine, as long as we just believe.
Quit your barking! Get and lay down!